The NFL is a staple in our culture today. It's by far the number one grossing sport in America, bringing in over $23 billion last year. But like any sport, this was not the case in its early years. So how did this billion-dollar league become what it is today? That's what I'll be discussing in this video, and there's a lot to unpack here, but I don't want the video to be an hour long, so get set because this is the quote-unquote quick history of the NFL. There were other professional football leagues before the NFL was formed. Some of these were the Allegheny Athletic Association, the Ohio League, the New York Pro Football League, and even some other independent leagues, but they weren't anywhere close to what you'd picture today as a professional sports league. There were no real standards set for the game or any rules surrounding the acquisition and payment of players in these leagues. So, in an effort to raise the standard of the game in every way possible, representatives from 4 professional teams in Ohio met at the Jordan and Hutt Mobile Auto Showroom in Canton, Ohio, to discuss a new league. Their goals for this new league were to end bidding wars for players and secure cooperation between a group of teams to play organized, predetermined schedules. This was followed by another meeting that included representatives from even more teams, and on September 17, 1920, the league that we now know as the NFL was conceived. Before diving into everything else, since I mentioned Canton, Ohio, I do want to quickly acknowledge the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It's located in Canton, not just because it's where the meeting that saw the creation of the NFL was held, but also because the Canton Bulldogs football team was the first true power of the league, winning 2 championships early on in 1922 and 23. Even though the Bulldogs franchise folded before the 1927 season, the citizens of Canton organized a campaign to bring the Hall of Fame to their city in the early 1960s, and after being approved in 1963, the Pro Football Hall of Fame was officially established. Now back to the main video. When the NFL was first founded, it was actually called the American Professional Football Conference. However, just a month later, this was quickly changed to the American Professional Football Association, which it would be known as until 1922, when the name was officially changed again to the National Football League, which obviously stuck. To help gain popularity among fans, the league also chose football and overall sports legend Jim Thorpe to be the league's first ever president, which back then was essentially the commissioner, even though Thorpe was also acting as both the current player and coach in the league. In the inaugural season, there were only 14 teams, and these squads came from just 5 different states: Ohio, Indiana, New York, Michigan, and Illinois. Ohio had 5 teams: the Canton Bulldogs, the Akron Pros, Dayton Triangles, Columbus Panhandles, and Cleveland Indians. Indiana had 2 teams, the Hammond Pros and Muncie Flyers. New York had 2 teams as well, the Rochester Jeffersons and the Buffalo All-Americans. Illinois brought in 4 squads, the Rock Island Independents, Decatur Staleys, Chicago Tigers, and the Racine Cardinals of Chicago. And lastly, only 1 team from Michigan, the Detroit Heralds. In the NFL's first season, the Akron Pros were named league champions after an 8-0-3 record, and by year 3, the All-American team was introduced, which is known today as the All-Pro team. Crazy enough, of the original 14 teams, only 2 still remain active today. These would be the Decatur Staleys, now the Chicago Bears, and the Racine Cardinals, now the Arizona Cardinals. To give you a scope at the teams of the league, I'll skip ahead briefly to lay out the timeline for a few of the other modern NFL teams. The Green Bay Packers joined the league in 1921, then known as the Acme Packers, followed by the New York Giants in 1925, Detroit Lions in 1930, then called the Portsmouth Spartans, Washington Redskins in 1932, then known as the Boston Braves, both the Philadelphia Eagles and Pittsburgh Steelers in 1933, and the Los Angeles Rams in 1937, then the Cleveland Rams. There were a number of other teams that came and went in the NFL, and it really all came down to money. The league was struggling financially in its early years, so ahead of the 1927 season, the tough decision to consolidate the league and purge the financially weakest franchises was made. In 1926, there were 22 teams, but at the start of the 27 season, there were just 12. Despite these early struggles, the league progressed and began evolving the gameplay more and more. In 1932, the forward pass was now legal from anywhere behind the line of scrimmage. Prior to this, the ball thrower had to be at least 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage, which obviously put a strain on the passing game. Hash marks were also added to the field this year to help with the flow of the game. Before the hashes were added, the plays would start from exactly where the ball was spotted at the end of the previous play, which could be inches away from the sideline. So now all plays had to start at or between the hashes instead of wherever the ball was downed. There were also no playoffs until 1933, so the team with the highest winning percentage at the end of the year was named champion. The way that the idea for playoffs came about is pretty interesting. In just the league's second season in 1921, the Decatur Staleys were controversially named champions after defeating the Buffalo All-Americans in the final game of the year. The reason this was controversial was because the season had actually ended before these two teams faced off, and Buffalo ended the year with the highest winning percentage. Essentially what happened was they agreed to play Decatur in an exhibition game, which they lost. This game was known as the Staley Swindle because although Buffalo finished the season with the best record, the league named the Cardinals champions since they defeated the All-Americans, even though Buffalo's owner made it clear that it was only an exhibition game. Basically, the decision-making process for naming a champion was pretty flawed early on. Then, in 1932, the Portsmouth Spartans and now Chicago Bears actually tied for first place in the league standings, something that hadn't happened before. So, this forced an extra game to be played between the two teams to determine one true champion. The game was technically added to the regular season, but it was dubbed a playoff between the two top teams battling for the title. While this was definitely a step in the right direction, the standards of the game still had a long way to go, as this playoff game, that was really a championship game, was originally scheduled to play at Wrigley Field in Chicago. But due to a terrible snowstorm, the game was moved to an indoor arena that didn't fit the normal regulation-sized football field. So, the rules of the game were altered slightly to accommodate the field size, which is insane to think about for a game that would decide the league champion. The Bears went on to win the game 9-0, and despite the altered rules and non-regulation field, essentially the first Arena League game, the interest level from fans rose dramatically because of the high stakes of the game. Due to this, the 1933 season introduced an official championship game. They split the league into two divisions, and each division's champion would face off in the title game, which is essentially how it's done now, although the playoff format wasn't quite what we see today. Through 1935, there were no real regulations regarding the acquisitions of players, so teams would essentially have bidding wars over the top talent coming out of college. But in 1936, the NFL draft was instituted, now allowing each team to reserve the rights to players through a fair draft system. But they did still need to agree to contract terms with the players. It may sound surprising, but because the NFL did not pay its players the astronomical salaries like it does now, the league wasn't as appealing to collegiate players back then. And as a result, when the Philadelphia Eagles made the first ever draft pick, selecting Heisman Trophy winner Jay Berwanger, he opted to forego a professional football career because they could not come to terms on his desired salary. There is a little more to this story, but I'll save that for a different day. This is a harsh contrast between the way first overall draft picks are treated now, but nonetheless, 1936 kicked off one of the most anticipated nights in the football world, and its importance only grew over the years just as the league did. The NFL basically operated in the same format for the next few decades with some alterations, with the Redskins moving from Boston to Washington, D.C. in 1937, the implementation of the roughing the passer penalty in 1938, and then the ineligible receiver downfield penalty in 1939. Over the next few decades, the NFL proved to be the nation's most popular professional football league, becoming increasingly popular with the help of televised games. While games technically began appearing on television in the late 1930s, the first teams to have every single game shown on TV were the Los Angeles Rams and Washington Redskins back in 1950. There have obviously been a number of network affiliation switches since this time, but this foreshadowed the popularity of pro football as national home entertainment. During the 40s, the league hierarchy implemented a number of new rules and innovations that shaped NFL gameplay into a more recognizable version of modern football. In 1941, they began issuing fines for violations of player conduct in an effort to cut down on unnecessary violence. They added flags to the corner of the end zones to indicate the scoring area in 1942, which eventually turned into pylons. They made it mandatory to wear helmets in 1943. And in 1944, they began allowing players and coaches to communicate freely on the field. Prior to this, all communication was between players only on the field, hence the creation of the huddle years prior. Also during this time, North America as a whole had a few different pro football leagues of reasonable prominence, such as the All-American Football Conference, the Canadian Football Circuit, now known as the CFL, and obviously the NFL. None of these other leagues were ever able to truly compete with the NFL, and instead, a few teams ended up joining them. From these leagues, we have three teams that still compete today. The Cleveland Browns, San Francisco 49ers, and Baltimore Colts all joined the NFL in 1950. But quick side note, this Colts franchise technically dissolved after one season, but then returned to the league in 1953, which is why I thought they were worth mentioning. In 1946, the Rams moved from Cleveland to Los Angeles, but the city quickly gained a new team that same year, the Browns. The chain gang was instituted in 1947 as well in an effort to accurately track the progress of the ball and down and distance. Then in 1948, the kicking tee was introduced for kickoffs, and referees were now required to use whistles, which replaced the bullhorns they used to have to use to signal the end of each play and quarter. Back in 1938, a league all-star game was introduced, but only lasted through 1942 until the league revived the game, now dubbed the Pro Bowl, which was played for the first time in Los Angeles in January of 1951. By around 1955, plastic helmets became increasingly popular, and the leather helmets were being phased out. Due to the hard plastic crowns, the NFL made it a requirement for all players to wear face masks on their headgear as protection. These face masks were all roughly the same style back then, but this birthed the full creation of one of the most recognizable aspects of the game today, the team helmets. 2 years later, in 1957, it was ruled that all home teams had to wear dark jerseys and away teams had to wear white jerseys. Before this rule, teams could wear whatever they wanted, and it could get confusing for fans, especially in bad weather games. While this uniform requirement did become a rule, there were still instances when home teams were able to wear white over the years. By now, the idea that the NFL was the only legitimate pro football league in North America was the consensus, or at least that was the consensus until 1960. Even as the NFL continued to grow, with the Chicago Cardinals leaving the Windy City for St. Louis to extend the NFL's coverage, and 2 new franchises joining the league, with the Dallas Cowboys coming along in 1960 and the Minnesota Vikings joining a year later in 1961, other leagues did still rise up to compete with them, though the NFL never really considered them threats. But in 1960, the 4th installment of the American Football League came about, and this time it was different. As television gained more popularity across the country, pro sports began battling for lucrative TV contracts to broadcast their games. The AFL may not have had the same level of talent as the NFL at the time, but they knew how to market themselves. And after landing some sizable TV deals, they were able to compete financially with the NFL and sign better players, even luring some of the NFL's top talent to their league, effectively creating a bidding war for the top players. After years of this, and the introduction of the face mask penalty in 1962, had to throw that in there, an announcement that would change the NFL forever was made. Ahead of the 1966 season, the NFL and AFL agreed to a merger, bringing both leagues together. Although the announcement was made in 1966, the official merger for regular season play wouldn't take place until 1970, so in the meantime, they adopted the NFL's playoff format, taking a champion from each league and then facing off at the end of the year to determine the true champion. So, on January 15th, 1967, the NFL's champion Green Bay Packers faced off against the AFL's champion, the Kansas City Chiefs, in a game called the AFL-NFL World Championship Game, better known now as the Super Bowl, although this name wouldn't actually stick until Super Bowl III. To commemorate the iconic championship game between the 2 pro leagues in the world, a special trophy was designed to honor the title winner, and it was called the World Professional Football Championship Trophy. In Super Bowl I, the Packers, led by coach Vince Lombardi, defeated the Chiefs and then repeated as world champions the following season, claiming the first 2 championship trophies for Green Bay. Sadly, Coach Lombardi passed away before the start of the 1970 season, which was also the first year that the NFL and AFL officially merged for regular season play. So, at the end of that season, ahead of Super Bowl V, the trophy was officially dubbed the Vince Lombardi Trophy, better known simply as the Lombardi Trophy, to pay homage to Green Bay's legendary coach. And since then, it has become arguably the most iconic and recognizable championship trophy in all of professional sports. Now we need to backtrack slightly to understand the landscape of the teams in both of these leagues. At the time of the NFL-AFL merger announcement, the NFL had 14 teams, like I said earlier. And to recap, these teams were the Bears, Cardinals, Packers, Giants, Lions, Redskins, Eagles, Steelers, Browns, Rams, 49ers, Colts, Cowboys, and Vikings. The AFL, on the other hand, only had 8 teams, these being the Patriots, Oilers, Bills, Jets, Broncos, Chiefs, Raiders, and Chargers. With the announcement of the merger, both leagues fought to claim new expansion franchises to add to the depth in their respective leagues, which resulted in the birth of the Atlanta Falcons in the NFL and the Miami Dolphins in the AFL. So, ahead of the 1966 season, there were 15 teams in the NFL and 9 in the AFL. The odd number of teams in both divisions actually forced the league to introduce bye weeks, giving each team 1 week without a game during the season in order for each team to play the full 14-game schedule. So each team played 14 games over a 15-week season, although the NFL would do away with this the following year after the addition of yet another team, the New Orleans Saints. And even though the AFL welcomed in the Cincinnati Bengals in 1968, bringing the league to 10 teams, they maintained the bye-week schedule. For the NFL teams, they were split up into 4 divisions: Capital, Century, Coastal, and Central. For the smaller AFL, there were only 2, the Eastern and Western divisions. When the NFL and AFL finally joined together and began playing as one league in 1970, the reformed NFL was split into two conferences. The former NFL teams became the NFC and the AFL teams became the AFC. There were now 26 teams in total, so to even everything out, the Steelers, Colts, and Browns left the NFC and joined in with the AFC. Within these two conferences, there were 3 divisions for each: East, West, and Central. However, this left the divisions a little uneven, with 5 teams in the East Division, but only 4 in the West and Central Divisions. The league format remained relatively the same for the next 20 to 25 years, although there were a number of significant alterations to gameplay and the look of the game that definitely added to a more advanced style of play. But a lot of it was really for fan experience as well, as you'll see a decent chunk of these rules are just to help fans follow the game better. In 1972, field numbers were added to the playing field, like the 10-yard line, 20-yard line, etc. And in 1973, jersey number categories were assigned by position. So numbers 1 through 19 for quarterbacks, 20 through 49 for running backs and DBs, 50 through 79 for offensive linemen and defensive linemen, etc. The goalposts were moved from the goal line to the end line in the back of the end zone in 1974. Sudden death overtime was introduced to try and avoid ties, and referees were given microphones to announce penalties in 1975, really so both the coaches and fans could hear what was happening. In 1976, play clocks were added to each end of the stadium so everyone could see the official time between snaps. But most importantly, this same year, the league added 2 new expansion teams, with the Seattle Seahawks joining the NFC and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers joining the AFC, growing the league to 28 teams. Although the 2 new teams would swap conferences the following season. The addition of these expansion franchises now shifted the awkward weight of the 3 divisions of the NFC and AFC, leaving the Central divisions with only 4 teams, but now both East and West featured 5. 2 years later, in 1978, the length of the season was extended from 14 games to a 16-game schedule, which lasted until 2021 when a 17th game was added. Along with the extra game, the playoff format was modified as well, going from 8 teams to 10 teams, which now included a wild card playoff game. The 1980 season would see the Pro Bowl game famously moved to be played in Hawaii, where it was played for the next 30 seasons straight. In 1981, Stickum was banned as it was seen as an unfair advantage for wide receivers. And for those of you that don't know, Stickum was, like its name, a super sticky tar-like goo that receivers commonly used in the 70s that was basically like having super glue on your hands. In 1982, the Oakland Raiders relocated to Los Angeles, and this was the same year that sacks were finally recorded as official stats. In 1983, another professional league known as the USFL popped up to compete with the NFL, though the league would fold before the 1986 season. Then, in 1984, the Colts left the city of Baltimore in a move that shook the football world, and they found a new home in Indianapolis. Then, in 1986, the instant replay was lightly adopted to help with more accurate officiating, although it was discontinued in 1992 until being brought back in 1999 in an updated format. The Cardinals moved from St. Louis to Phoenix, Arizona in 1988 and officially changed their name to the Arizona Cardinals in 1994. 1990 was the first season since 1966 that bye weeks were instituted across the entire NFL. 1993 featured an updated version of the intentional grounding rule, now allowing QBs to throw the ball away even if no receiver is in the area as long as they are outside of the tackle box. Along with this, modern free agency was instituted, so there were no more reserve clauses for players, meaning that they could freely explore other contract offers from different franchises when their current contract ended. And it sounds late because it's a pretty big part of the game now, but the 2-point conversion was added in 1994. But probably more importantly, the salary cap was established in an effort to even the playing field for all teams when it came to contract negotiations and roster signings. At this time, both the Raiders and the Rams announced their departure from Los Angeles, with the Raiders heading back to Oakland in 1994 and the Rams filling the void in St. Louis in 95. Also in 1995, 2 more expansion teams were added, with the Carolina Panthers joining the NFC and Jacksonville Jaguars joining the AFC, now giving the NFL an even 30 teams. With these 2 expansion franchises being added, the league was finally evened out, now with 5 teams in each division. This was also the first season that quarterbacks were permitted to receive communication from the bench through a radio receiver in their helmets, which is now commonly seen today. The constant movement around the league continued, and the Cleveland Browns made a historic move in 1996 that shook the league. I dove into this in much more detail in an earlier video, so be sure to check it out. The link is in the description. But in a nutshell, the Browns left Cleveland and rebranded the franchise as the Baltimore Ravens with the same roster and coaching staff. although the actual rights to the Browns' organizational history were left to the city of Cleveland. The year after the original Cleveland Browns became the Ravens, the Houston Oilers made a similar move, leaving Houston and going to Tennessee in 1997, then doing a full rebrand as the Tennessee Titans in 1999, putting the Oilers logo to rest. 1999 also saw the revival of a legendary NFL team. Remember when I said the rights to the Browns' history were left to the city of Cleveland? Well, the city of Cleveland fought to regain a pro football team, and the newly born Cleveland Browns rejoined the NFL as an expansion franchise. This was also the year that the challenge flag was introduced, which has obviously influenced the game greatly. When the Browns franchise was revived, the NFL was left with an awkward 31 teams. So to even out the numbers, similar to Cleveland, the city of Houston regained a professional team with the emergence of the Houston Texans in 2002, bringing the NFL to the 32-team power as we know it today. To avoid any awkward divisional alignment, this addition also brought forth the creation of a new division, the South, meaning that each conference now had a North, South, East, and West division. There have been a few other changes, like the iconic one-bar face mask being officially outlawed, and the season being extended from 16 to 17 games, along with some teams flipping conference affiliations. However, one of the most notable changes in this time was when the Pro Bowl game unpopularly left Hawaii in 2011 after 30 consecutive seasons. It did return in 2011, but starting in 2015, the All-Star Game said goodbye to Honolulu for good and has since held the game at various locations. Along with this, the Pro Bowl game itself has transformed into more of an all-around skills competition rather than a game. Also in 2015, the Rams relocated yet again, this time leaving St. Louis for LA. The Chargers followed them in 2017 when they left San Diego after over 50 years, and in a sense, they returned to LA because they did technically play their inaugural season there back in 1960. Then, in my opinion, the biggest recent change to the game as a whole was the modification of the Chain Crew, aka the Chain Gang, this year in 2025. According to the league, the use of a chain gang is no longer required for first down measurements, and instead they moved to a new Hawkeye technology for more accuracy. There are hundreds of other minor rule changes that occurred since the early days of the NFL, but in my opinion, these are the core changes that shaped the game we know and love today. So there you have it, the quickest explanation of the entire history of the NFL that I could put together, at least without skipping what I felt were important details. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe even learned something, and if you did, hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel, as it'll really help me grow the page. But until next time, get set because I'll have another video coming soon.